At the end of Marvel's Civil War event, Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, found himself being named not only Secretary of Defense, but also Director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
This had been part of a character overhaul for Iron Man, who is now characterized as a futurist, trying to make sure that he was on the right side of societal change. To this extent, Tony Stark began supporting the Superhero Registration Act, which would require any superpowered individual to register as a licensed agent of the government. It would also be revealed that Stark had been part of a secret cabal alongside Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, Charles Xavier of the X-Men, Black Bolt of the Inhumans, Namor the Submariner, and Doctor Strange. This Marvel Illuminati would work on things like tricking Bruce Banner onto a satellite and blasting him off into space in a way that wouldn't possibly come back to bite them on the you-know-what. Stark had also exposed himself to an experimental serum called Extremis, which allowed him to be psychically linked to his Iron Man armor, even being able to store it in the hollows of his skeletal system and summon it through his skin.
I mean, it's almost as if Marvel was gearing up to push Iron Man as a major player in 2008. I mean, they needed to promote him for something. I can't seem to think of what it could possibly be. I'll probably come to it later. Anyway, today we're looking at the first story arc of Tony Stark trying to walk the balance between private businessman, representative of the federal government, and of course, superhero. This is the Invincible Iron Man, The Five Nightmares.
In Tabora, Tanzania, a group of teenage girls chip in on a smartphone from Starkcom. They prepare to take a group selfie when a car full of young men pulls up. The men appear to be in pain as they get out. A familiar-looking glow begins coming from their chests. It's then an explosion that engulfs all of Tabora goes off. Tony Stark has 5 nightmares that have dominated his life. He's reminded of the first, an alcohol relapse, as he entertains a young woman. Any further romantic pursuit is interrupted by a call from S.H.I.E.L.D. about the explosion. This was a nuclear-level explosion with almost no fallout. The only terrorist group operating in the area is an AIM spin-off called Advanced Genocide Mechanics. As this is happening, the real individual behind the explosion, a young man named Zeke, prepares for a meeting with some top executives. They represent the tobacco industry, and Zeke just invented a cigarette that causes weight loss. Zeke reveals that he took the money from Big Tobacco and upgraded his mind and body, so he doesn't even need to eat, sleep, or even breathe. Ezekiel Stane then reveals several other biomechanical enhancements as he blows away the tobacco execs and hops out of a window.
Ezekiel Stane is the son of Obadiah Stane, a ruthless munitions dealer who attempted a hostile takeover of Stark Industries when Tony had a relapse of his alcoholism. Stane would go on to construct what he believed to be a superior Iron Man armor called the Ironmonger. Iron Man was able to take out the Ironmonger by using a strong electromagnetic pulse that neutralized the armor's central operating system, and rather than be arrested, Stane elected to take his own life with a repulsor blast to the head. Ezekiel Stane has blamed Iron Man for his father's death and has sworn revenge ever since. Now, I'm certain there's a reason why the Stanes have popped back up again, and it's on the tip of my tongue. I just can't seem to think of what it was. I mean, I know it's there, it's just...
Before departing for Tanzania, Tony has Pepper Potts run a diagnostic scan and monitors Extremis armor to optimize its performance. With that, Tony suits up and takes off while going over the other 4 nightmares that have dominated his life. The nightmares all dovetail nicely into each other. Number 2 is that the Iron Man technology could become easy to replicate. Number 3 is that Iron Man becomes obsolete, and thus number 4, disposable. As Tony touches down into Bora and begins scanning the area, number 5 immediately pops into mind. The next-gen Iron Man armor hitting the scene, and Tony Stark not being the one who invented it. Iron Man and his S.H.I.E.L.D. forces then go through an AIG lair. The terrorists don't put up much of a fight and ends easily when Iron Man chucks the group's leader, MODOK, into outer space. However, scans of the AIG facility turn up no traces of Stark technology. Things go from bad to worse as a report comes in from the Philippines. A Southeast Asian super team was being honored for actions taken during a tsunami when they were approached by a group of Buddhist monks. It turns out the monks were actually a group of human bombs from Stane's arsenal. They went up, taking the super team with them. Iron Man would wind up attending the funeral and was surprised to find Thor in attendance as well. As it turned out, one of the team members was a lightning deity, so Thor felt a kinship with her. The Thunder God doesn't give Iron Man much time.
For the backstory behind the animosity between Thor and Iron Man, check out the Random Trait Review episode 79, where I review the first volume of J. Michael Straczynski's Thor run.
Tony and Pepper prepare for a gala at Stark Industries' Taiwan offices. Tony mingles with a group of women and irks Pepper by telling her to grab some drinks for the entire group. Pepper storms off, and Tony is approached by, of all people, Ezekiel Stane. Before anything else can happen, a group of the human bombs enter the room. Outside, Pepper continues exiting the building when the explosion goes off and debris begins crashing down on top of her.
Although the job title held by Virginia Pepper Potts is that of Tony Stark's personal secretary, in reality she pretty much runs Stark Industries, especially when Tony is out gallivanting as Iron Man. Pepper is best known for the love triangle she had with both Tony and his chauffeur, Happy Hogan. She would wind up married to Happy until his death during the Civil War storyline. And yeah, Pepper's sudden reappearance in Tony Stark's life has something to do with that thing I mentioned before, but my memory, it's just still cheating me at this point.
Stark manages to armor up and takes off looking for Pepper. He manages to locate her alive, but with serious internal injuries. As he loads Pepper onto an ambulance, Tony spots another survivor, Ezekiel Stane. Stane is taken to a different hospital, but his bioenhancements allow for quick healing and he stages a fiery escape. He's picked up by his lover/chief assistant Sasha, where he points out that he's going to need some help, as the one drawback with his bioenhancements is that he can no longer regulate his body temperature. Back with Tony Stark, he receives news on Pepper's condition. She has multiple pieces of shrapnel near her heart and spinal. They need to be removed, but they are so close that there's an extremely high risk of paralysis or even death. However, they can't be left alone, as any piece could easily be jostled free and kill her.
As you may have noticed, the injuries suffered by Pepper Potts are similar to those suffered by Tony Stark that caused him to develop the Iron Man technology to begin with. His armor's central power unit being this magnet that he placed in his chest to actually stabilize the shrapnel and keep it in place long enough so it could hopefully be surgically removed. Now I know there's a more popular term for that device, but it didn't originate in the comics. It popped up somewhere else again that I can't remember.
With no other choice, Tony orders that a high-powered magnet be embedded in Pepper's chest to suspend the shrapnel until it can possibly be removed without harm. Tony then goes off to investigate the explosion site, and just as he finds a piece of Stark technology that matches the Tanzania and Filipino attacks, he gets chased off by the Chinese government. Stark has realized that Stane has been buying old Stark technology on the black market and tweaking it into a weapon of mass destruction. As this is happening, Stane is fashioning a new version of the Ironmonger armor to help regulate his core temperature and finally take down Tony Stark. Tony returns to his workshop and begins working with older versions of his Iron Man armor when Pepper checks in. Tony explains the Chinese tried to implant a tracking virus in his armor pieces, but he managed to nullify the software and isolate it so it could be modified and placed in the old armor pieces, which will then be sold on the black market so they can hopefully track down Stane's location when he purchases them. All the talk over recent events has worried Pepper about what's going on with the device in her chest, but Tony assures her that everything is going to be alright. Later, Maria Hill checks in wondering if any S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives are going to get access to the type of technology Pepper has. But that's not going to happen. Widespread Iron Man implementation is economically unfeasible, even if it would greatly help in the field.
Maria Hill was actually demoted to being deputy director of S.H.I.E.L.D. under Tony Stark when she had been running the organization after taking it over from Nick Fury. So, yeah, you can kind of understand why there's a bit of animosity between the two, which of course means they've also been sleeping together. Also, normally Maria is depicted as being a brunette, but for some reason they made her blonde here.
The waiting game begins as the armor pieces are put on the black market via a collector of superhero pieces named Gross. A few weeks go by, turning up nothing. Meanwhile, Pepper approaches Tony, wanting her stabilizer removed. She doesn't want to be a living weapon. Tony takes Pepper aside and explains that while the device is based on his old stabilizer, it's really a high-powered magnet developed by Rand Industries. The magnet can be charged from tapping into the various electromagnetic fields that all electrical devices give off. She can even modify those electrical fields to levitate in the air. She's a battery, not a bomb. All of this is interrupted by a call from Maria Hill. The armor is turned up in a few different places: New York City, Los Angeles, Valencia, Spain, and Tokyo, all of which have major branches of Stark Industries headquartered within them. Tony and Pepper send out evacuation orders to the various facilities, with Stane and his operatives sneaking inside them by hiding amongst guided tour groups. Iron Man begins trying to hone in on Stane, who's already aware that he's being tracked. Even though not all of his operatives are in position, Stane orders Sasha to activate one of them. She chooses the one in Valencia, and 58 people die in the resulting explosion. Stane begins laying a trap by activating a cloaking device in his armor and waiting for Iron Man to get in position. Even though Iron Man's armor is more advanced, Stane more than holds his own in the fight. Zeke claims he'll do to Tony what Tony did to Obadiah. When Tony tries to explain that Obadiah took his own life, Ezekiel blows Iron Man's head off. Stane celebrates and begins attempting to rip Tony Stark's headless corpse from the armor, except the armor is completely empty. Stark had actually slipped out of the armor during the fight and was remotely controlling it. In fact, he's been drone piloting several sets of armor to all the different facilities and taking down Stane's remaining operatives. Stark then manages to slip into another suit of armor and blasts a giant electromagnetic pulse at Stain. It shuts down his armor, but unfortunately it winds up killing all of his operatives, as it turns out their technology was all somehow wired into his. Tony steps out of the armor and begins beating Stain to submission as S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives arrive to take Stain away. Later, Tony reflects on the events and that he now has a sixth nightmare. The fact that in order to make the world a safer place, he'll sometimes have to do the wrong thing for the right reasons.
You would think this would be the end of the story, but we actually get an addendum that takes a look at Iron Man from a different viewpoint. See, while working together in the Avengers, Peter Parker and Tony Stark became very close friends. During the Civil War event, Peter, at Tony's behest, revealed his identity as Spider-Man to the general public. However, the two would soon have a falling out, and Peter would eventually take a job working at Frontline, an online newspaper being run by former Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich. Also, around this time, shipping on Marvel titles was really erratic and spotty and just not very dependable. I mean, this storyline takes place in the event after the events of Civil War, but it came out concurrent with the events of World War Hulk. And the story arc that takes place after this is set after the events of Secret Invasion. So yeah, I have no idea, but I think the Spider-Man story takes place after the events of One More Day, but I can't completely place that.
Peter Parker and Ben Urich attend a Stark Industries press conference where Tony addresses the damage from Ezekiel Stain's actions. Stark also announces his intentions to pursue any unsold Iron Man pieces on the black market. Peter and Tony have a very awkward moment as the press conference ends, and Peter suspects that Tony knows more than he is letting on. Peter changes into a Spider-Man outfit and tries to lay low as he eavesdrops on Iron Man overseeing the cleanup procedure. However, when a pile of debris begins to fall on a worker, Spidey can't help but intercede. Iron Man takes Spider-Man to task as he's unregistered, but Peter changes the subject to that of the press conference. Iron Man admits that he's tracked down the missing armor pieces. Two of them were with lower tier villains, the Tinkerer and Jackson Wheel, with the other still being with Mr. Gross, the Collector from before. Spidey wants to come along and help, but again, he's unregistered, so it's a no. Spider-Man winds up tagging along anyway as he's attached a tracer to Stark's suit. He gets in the way, but does manage to help tackle Tinkerer and Wheel. With Gross, Iron Man switches into civilian mode to talk with him. The Collector doesn't want to part with anything. Afterwards, out of gratitude, Iron Man decides to let Spider-Man go without reporting him. Stark has kept the veneer of confidence throughout everything, but as he leaves, Peter sees that even Iron Man has his down moments and takes a picture that ends up on the Frontline homepage.
And that concludes Invincible Iron Man, The Five Nightmares. How was it? Well, on the plus side, I think there's some really good characterization throughout all of this. Pepper's really good. Ezekiel Stain and his motivations come across well. You get a lot of his reasoning, and he's not a very likable guy, so it seems spot on. And I think this does a really good job of rehabilitating Tony in the wake of the Civil War event. Even though when I was reading the Civil War event, I actually did side with Tony Stark on a lot of things. The story didn't do a good job of telling his viewpoint very well. I mean, it's where the Iron Man is a douche meme originated. So having a story that makes Tony seem like a good guy again and having him dealing with the aftermath of Civil War does seem to really work in this. And the artwork, for the most part, is really good, except for one thing, which I talked about earlier and we'll talk about again. On the negative side, again, that Spider-Man story that ends this is really superfluous. It doesn't do much, unfortunately. I understand why it's in here. I mean, it couldn't be in Volume 2 because that volume takes place after the events of Secret Invasion, so it just wouldn't have worked out. But yeah, like I said, it doesn't really add anything. It just kind of feels like filler. And like I said before, I have a problem with, I don't know if it's the Salvador Lorca's artwork that did this or if it was just the coloring in general where they goofed. But again, why is Maria Hill all blonde? She's supposed to be a brunette. Like, that's a pretty big mistake to make. I mean, ugh. Anyway, I know that last one's kind of nitpicky, but it did stick in my craw a little bit. I'm going to give Invincible Iron Man, The Five Nightmares, a B. And with that, let's see what we're doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, got a request for the show? Check out my Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions. And if you like the video, give it a like, share it, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.
I just remembered what it was. Marvel was promoting the Iron Man Armored Adventures series that was on Nicktoons.
Really Iron Man, and I can't believe he fell for that.